I basically have been working around technology and data for quite some time, and it's quite interesting when you started introducing to say that African governments and businesses are not necessarily understanding the value. So when you say value, of course, that's data. And so then how do we ensure that people understand value, but also understand that the circular economy, in my view, was basically built for the African continent. So I think a couple of pointers as we look at why I say this. The fourth industrial revolution, for those who do not know, is basically the stage where we are at now in terms of economic development. The first, of course, was the one that was pegged and driven by steam, and we know in terms of the mindset of the circular economy what that meant. There's a lot of inefficiencies around that. There's a lot of destruction of the environment because steam requires literally burning either coal or forest. The second revolution coming thereby in the 19th century was very much around electricity, but also how that catalyzed or precipitated kind of mass production. And the minute you say mass production in the mindset of the circular economy, of course, we know what that means. It's simply basically that was a period when we started getting into Anthropocene, right? So the period where human activity was very much detrimental to the environment. Come the third industrial revolution, as we think, and this is funny perspectives, that we think we're getting better, we're actually getting worse. Coming into the third industrial revolution, of course, with the onset of ICT, so that's information communication technologies, we also saw how we started basically driving carbon emissions into the atmosphere. The climate started becoming warmer simply because we are now more connected, we're communicating more, we're producing more. And so a consumerist or consumption culture basically started emerging out of that. Now comes the fourth industrial revolution, where we are seeing a fusion of the biological and the physical world, where the digital and the biological actually has fused. And so the problem is that where we are right now is everything is very much at an accelerated pace. And so we were producing more, now we're producing at a very accelerated pace. I always tell people that the iPhone was basically built in 2008. I'm sure we think it was with us for more than 100 years, but that's just the rapid pace. We are at an iPhone 12 right now. The iPhone 12 is potentially 400 to 500 more powerful than the computer that sent a man to the moon. And you can imagine what that means, right? And so I think we are seeing how that fourth industrial revolution is basically transforming how we live, work, and communicate. It's permeating in every area or sphere of life. The trends, thank you so much, Sheila, for this. The trends, I think, as we've seen, is those key four trends, right? So digitization, I think if you can go into the trends page, digitization, smartization, thank you so much, integration and virtualization. And that basically means that everything is expressed in terms of data, as I mentioned. Everything is basically integrated. Somehow everything is smart. So we are heading intelligent systems, right? So I think a lot of us are hearing issues around artificial intelligence, robotics, virtual reality, and this is what is shaping our interactions. Next slide, please. Basically, then I think when you look at those characteristics, then it tells us that this revolution, because of the mixture of the cyber and the physical, and for those who understand the circular economy, then you know basically that the fourth industrial revolution is built around the circular economy. And so in terms of definition, I think from where I see it and around technology is that the circular economy is basically a new of how we design, make, and use things, but also understanding that we need to confine that within our planetary boundaries. We only have one planet, as we say it. And so how do we ensure that we do everything within our boundaries so that we're not doing everything with excesses? And basically the circular economy, and I'm sure Nawe has been talking about, is basically a shift on how we design out waste and pollution, on how we keep products and materials in use for as much as we can, and finally is how do we ensure that we regenerate our natural systems. And so when when you look at that context and imagine the first, second, and third, you actually realize that we are in very much of a predatory economic model that is very linear. So it talks about extracting, creating, and disposing. And my worry is that at the moment, and I'm sure all of you know this, any electronic gadget that you have right now, you're probably not repairing it. You're probably disposing it and getting a new one. We are seeing less and less repair shops. When you look at the leading electronic companies and go to fast-moving consumer goods, is that there's really not much of a repair mindset, and neither is there very much a mindset around how will you use the same waste and plug it back as raw material. Being in Africa, food systems is something that I think is critical to us, right? So as much as we produce enough food globally for the world, 30% goes to waste. And yet 60% will need to produce 60% more than what we produce today, if at all, we are to feed the sort of growing population, and at industrial scale. But even when we do this, the agricultural practices right now are depleting the soil. So how will we maintain this? And that tells you that I think the current economic model is resource intensive. And therefore, we see the impacts of this, whether it's in pollution of the air. I always tell people in Nairobi, our largest ailment in the city is actually respiratory. And that accounts to 80%. So if you combine 80% of respiratory diseases plus hand washing, we kind of taken care of our health system. So should we be thinking of a new economic model? And can technology enable this new economic model? And so the thing about the fourth industrial revolution and technology, of course, it helps us have a life cycle approach in terms of how do you ensure that you can be efficient in terms of production using very finite resources that we have. But then also, how do you also ensure that there's a place for everybody? Africa, we are largely smallholder. We talk about women. Women are the majority of the informal economy in Africa, which is about 85.8%. So how do you ensure that we can wield the fourth industrial revolution technologies? And we've seen the spread of mobile phones, right? We've been able to have financial inclusion without necessarily going through the industrial phase of getting people in the bank. We've been able to sort of increase our communication without necessarily going through doing fixed lines. So how do we ensure that then we leverage on this technology to ensure that we are as diverse and we're inclusive? And I'm glad that Dr. Rose had mentioned this. There's also an economic opportunity. So especially within the technology space, the global e-waste market, right? So waste coming out of technology is pegged at around $41.97 billion last year, anticipated to be raised to about $102 billion by 2027. So there's actually an opportunity to create wealth out of waste. So waste, basically, I think we kind of have to find another name for it in future. And so technology can accelerate this. We do not necessarily need to be resource intensive like our brothers in the West. Our industries are quite nascent and are not legacy. So we can quickly transition into creating efficient economies through technology. And I think quickly, just examples of this, of course, because of artificial intelligence, it means we can be able to predict so that we cannot waste, and so we can prolong life of assets. When you talk about technologies like blockchain, it means we can enhance our traceability. We can understand supply chains and so reduce waste. With 3D printing, we can do spare parts quite easily. With artificial intelligence, it means we can actually accelerate the pace of how we innovate and design products without necessarily being so resource intensive, whether it's human or material, but then we can also build and optimize business models. So I think my takeaways are this. One is that I think Africa is poised for this, and I'm sure that the two panelists who are coming to speak will speak about this. That's why when you talk about innovation right now, especially around new economic models or production or productivity, it's always Africa. And so I think we can lead simply because we are poised for this revolution. But also we can do it more responsibly in that we are inclusive. And so that this revolution of the circular economy does not leave women behind. But how can we do this? So that's actually my next key slide. We need to think through investments. Nothing comes without investing. And so we need to invest in 5 areas. You cannot talk about technology for the industrial revolution, circular economy, and how to harness this revolution without data. We need to know where things are, and you need to be efficient about it. We need to also to understand how to innovate around energy, renewable and clean, of course, because we do not necessarily have to go through the other revolutions that we had to do big grids. We can do smart grids. The internet is something that we need to invest in simply because that's the engine of communication, but increasingly that's the engine of life. If COVID-19 have shown us anything, is that without internet, you probably will be not only disrupted but dislocated. You'll totally be out. So how do we ensure that we invest in the internet that is affordable, accessible, but also of good quality and undisrupted? The other bit, of course, is capacity. Because of this rapid change and things moving very quickly, even through the circular economy, we need to skill, reskill, and upskill ourselves. How do we do that efficiently without the vagaries of the education system that does not respond or adapt to this context? Finally, I think is governance, and that's been a proverbial African challenge. But then how do you ensure that we have agile governance that is more facilitating than obstructing? And so I think for me, my last question is, are we ready for this new paradigm, even though we know Africa can lead? Thank you very much.